Now, as the name of the video implies, this is part 15 of a story, which means if you haven't seen any or all of the previous 14 parts, this likely isn't going to make any sense to you, so I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below, so you can either check out the first episode to see if you like it, or catch up on the ones you've missed before watching this one. And now, without any further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves in a dark, dingy cave, lit only by a small fire, where we can hear the sounds of a storm raging outside, and see a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, maybe a year younger than we've seen him in The Phantom Menace, sitting near the fire with his back to the cave wall, and sleeping with her head on his shoulder is Satine. And as we watch, we see her eyes slowly flutter open, and as soon as she realizes her head was on his shoulder, she straightens up, tries to look dignified, and asks where Qui-Gon is. "Gone to find us something to eat, hopefully that is," Obi-Wan replies as he picks up a stick and pokes at the fire with it. Satine then gives him a sidelong glance and comments, "Well, hopefully he doesn't run into any Venomites out there like we did." Obi-Wan shakes his head and rolls his eyes as he says, "How many times do I have to apologize for dropping you? I was just trying to get us out of there as fast as I could." Satine then sighs and says, "Well, I didn't need your help getting out of there. Now I've got a cut that's never going to properly heal because we're light years away from anything even remotely resembling a civilized system where someone could properly tend to it." Obi-Wan, with a frown on his face, then tosses the stick into the fire and mutters, "Well, how was I supposed to know it was a giant nest and not a good place to take shelter from the storm?" Satine replies, "Aren't Jedi supposed to be able to sense things like that?" To that, Obi-Wan chuckles and says, "Well, it's not quite that simple, and besides, being in tune with the living force isn't my speciality. Just ask Master Qui-Gon. And I'm not exactly a Jedi, not yet anyway." Satine is quiet for a long moment before almost hesitantly asking, "You say that almost as if you're not sure it's what you want to be. A Jedi, I mean." Obi-Wan shrugs, grabs another stick, and begins to poke at the fire again. He doesn't look at her once as he speaks. Being a Jedi, or training to be one, is all I've ever known. I have no real memories of my parents, just some random images and feelings is all. And I know it's a noble life, but never once do I remember anyone giving me a choice, asking me if this is what I want. It's always just been assumed that my destiny was to be a Jedi because, apparently, the Force chose me for this life." To that, Satine replies with a bit of a chuckle, which causes Obi-Wan to frown and ask what's so funny. "Because our lives have not been so different," Satine replies. "No one has ever asked me what it is I want. It's always just been assumed I would grow up and be the one to finally unite Mandalore under a banner of peace." Obi-Wan, looking slightly confused, then asks, "And isn't that what you want? A peaceful Mandalore, I mean?" Immediately, Satine nods and says, "Of course it is, but sometimes, and though I feel ashamed to admit this, I find myself angry that I'm the one who has to give up my own dreams to save everyone else." And as soon as she finishes saying that, Satine shakes her head and looks away and begins to mutter about how foolish she is to complain about responsibility to a Jedi. But that's when Obi-Wan reaches out and takes her hand, and she instantly falls silent and settles back down. "I know exactly how you feel," Obi-Wan then says to her, "because if I were given the choice between the life of a Jedi and a life of my own design, I'm not sure what I'd pick." Satine looks at her hand in his and then asks, "And what would you want your life to look like? The one of your own design, I mean." Obi-Wan gives a faint smile and says, "I'm not sure what it would look like, nor have I given much thought to that. Besides, when it comes to how we live our lives, I think the only real important choice is who we decide to share that life with." After a long, rather awkward moment of silence, Satine suddenly blurts out, "I must become Duchess of Mandalore. For countless generations my people have known nothing but war, and I have a chance to put an end to all of that. So many are depending on me. My people are depending on me." Obi-Wan gives a nod of the head and says, "Of course, I must become a Jedi, just like one of the thousands of other Jedi who help people here and there across a galaxy so large, most of it is still unexplored. Unless, perhaps, someone did give me a choice." Satine then smiles at Obi-Wan, but there is a sadness in it, and she says as we focus back in on the young face of Kenobi, "You always have a choice, Ben, even if no one else can or will offer it to you." As we watch the face of Obi-Wan and listen to Satine speak, it begins to age and become scarred. "Just because you have followed one path for years, the path of the Jedi, doesn't mean you can't turn from it if you want, And if you're strong enough, I suppose, strong enough to face the unknown. And if you do ever choose to turn from it, if you do become someone else, you can always make another choice if you're not happy with who you've become, and then find your way back to wherever it is you feel you belong. And when Satine's words come to an end, we pull back from his face and find Obi-Wan sitting on a sofa in Padme's apartment, staring blankly at absolutely nothing. Sitting silently at his side, though with a noticeable space between them, is Padme. That's when we move to an adjoining room and jump into the middle of a conversation between Ahsoka and Anakin, who both keep their eyes on Obi-Wan as they speak. "Master," we then hear Ahsoka say, "you can't possibly believe he's suddenly turned from the dark side. I mean, I don't even know how many times I've heard Master Dooku warning us about just starting down the dark path." Anakin, with his eyes clearly going back and forth between Obi-Wan and Padme, then says, "I don't know, Ahsoka. I have to believe anyone could come back after losing their way like Obi-Wan did. Even me if I ever fell to the dark side." To that, Ahsoka rolls her eyes and says, "You fall to the dark side, Master? That's ridiculous." "Maybe," Anakin says back, "but many years ago on Tatooine, after I lost my mother and Qui-Gon, I felt so much anger and hatred, and I too would have lost my way and likely fallen, if not for Master Dooku teaching me that it's okay to have emotion, and to even use them when you must, but to never let them control you." Ahsoka frowns and folds her arms before then saying, "But think about how many Jedi he's killed, Master. He's beyond redemption." Anakin gives a slight shrug. "Maybe, but maybe not. Besides, what would you have me do? Execute him? Such an act would make us no better than the Sith." Again, Ahsoka frowns, but then says, "But aren't you the chosen one, Master? Aren't you supposed to destroy the Sith?" Anakin gives her a look to let her know how much he dislikes being called the chosen one, then says, "Obi-Wan seems to think I can help him somehow. And if that's the case, then that should be my first option, not just destroying him. Just keep your guard up around him, okay, Snips?" It's now Ahsoka's turn to give him a look as she says, "Snips? Really, Master? How'd you like it if I call you Sky Guy or something?" To that, Anakin chuckles and shakes his head, and the scene ends. Which is when we are again taken to a strange landscape, divided by darkness and light, life and death, and see Qui-Gon and Bastila on one side, facing down Revan, who leads a horde of wraith-like Sith, on the other. That's when two figures, an elderly man with a long white beard and wearing a hat, and a beautiful green-haired woman that seems almost luminescent, appear behind Qui-Gon and Bastila, who then turn and greet the newcomers with a slight, reverent bow of the head. The old man then says to Qui-Gon, "The balance must be maintained," and then proceeds to hand him a long, almost arrow-headed shaped dagger. Qui-Gon then gives another bow of the head before taking it, which is when the woman steps forward and touches the dagger, causing an explosion of light that all but blinds us. And when the light slowly fades, the woman and the old man are gone, and we see that the dagger in Qui-Gon's hand now glows, almost like a white lightsaber. Bastila then says to Qui-Gon, "I shall deal with my husband. You must handle the horde." Qui-Gon gives one nod, raises the dagger, and quickly strides forward towards the endless army of wraith-like Sith, while slowly, Bastila also begins to walk forward, and as she does, Revan too begins to slowly walk forward to meet her. And when Qui-Gon reaches the horde, they immediately begin to try to swarm him, but with one swing of the dagger, he unleashes a wave of blinding energy that crashes into them and simply obliterates perhaps some 20 of them. The horde then rushes forward again, but once more Qui-Gon swings the dagger and unleashes another wave of energy that destroys even more of them. And for a few moments, we watch as Qui-Gon keeps swinging, and more keep trying to overrun him. Which is when we focus back in on Bastila and Revan, who have stopped walking and now stand but a few paces apart, looking at each other. It is then Bastila who says, "It doesn't have to be like this. There is still hope for you. For us." We then see Revan's head lower, as if he's thinking about or considering what she's just said. But a moment later, his head snaps back up, and as it does, he extends his hand out and force pushes Bastila back a great distance. Which is when we immediately switch scenes and find ourselves on the island of the First Jedi Temple, where the four masters are still locked in some type of force struggle, where a ball of swirling dark and light side energy has formed between them. But now that ball of energy explodes, and the shockwave that is unleashed flies towards the two Jedi Masters and knocks both of them backwards and off their feet. The two Sith Lords then waste no time, and simultaneously, without needing a look or word, both focus on Dooku, who appears unconscious, seemingly having taken the brunt of the shockwave, and both unleash Force lightning upon him. But in the nick of time, Yoda jumps in front of the oncoming surge of lightning that no doubt would have killed Dooku, and he raises his hands and manages to begin to contain the lightning and ball it up before him. But doing so quickly begins to take its toll on the ancient Jedi Master, and we can see that Yoda is visibly getting weaker and weaker, and even see burns on his face caused by the intensity of the lightning. This goes on for several more seconds before Yoda, with seemingly everything he's got left inside of him, manages to redirect the lightning towards Sidious, who immediately stops shooting lightning and instead tries to block it, but does not have the same success Yoda did. That's when Plagueis, who is still unleashing Force lightning towards Yoda, glances at his former apprentice, who is cackling madly as he gets electrocuted and as his face begins to burn and become deformed. And for maybe the briefest of moments, Plagueis seems to consider stopping to spare Sidious, but instead Plagueis only snarls and seems to intensify his attack, which is when Yoda's defenses finally give out, and he takes the full force of the lightning. Slowly then, and with a grin upon his face, Plagueis begins to walk forward as he continues to hit Yoda with lightning, and all the ancient Jedi Master can do is writhe around on the ground in pain. After watching this for several long seconds, we see Yoda is no longer moving. That's when we hear a saber ignite, which finally causes Plagueis to stop the lightning, and we now watch as Dooku gets to his feet, makes a flourish with his ignited blue saber, and then looks at Plagueis with a look on his face that is so calm and confident that it apparently scares Plagueis, who fumbles to retrieve his own saber. Without a word, Dooku then attacks with a relentless ferocity that is at odds with the still ever so calm expression upon his face. He then quickly drives Plagueis back, who is doing all he can just to block the extremely rapid yet still graceful attacks of Dooku, and it isn't long before Dooku scores one hit, then another, and literally takes Plagueis apart piece by piece. But never once does the expression upon his face change. Never once does Dooku seem to take any pride in his quick, yet rather brutal victory over the Sith Lord. And when Darth Plagueis the Wise is no more, Dooku immediately looks for Sidious, but that's when we see and hear the ship the two Sith Lords arrived in take off and fly off up into the atmosphere, which is when Dooku takes one long deep breath and lets it out slowly, before he turns and faces the seemingly lifeless form of Master Yoda. But that's when we hear a weak little cough, and Dooku rushes forward and kneels beside his master. "Defeated, the Sith were," Yoda manages to say. "One of them, Master. The other got away, for now." Yoda, clearly struggling to speak, then says, "Let him go, you must. Continue to train your students here, you will." To that, Dooku shakes his head and says, "Train them here, but the Sith know where we are now." Yoda manages to give a faint smile. "And hidden before all this, were we?" Dooku manages a small chuckle and a grin. "No, I don't suppose we were hiding on Coruscant. Though far less enemies we had to fear then." Yoda gives a slight nod. "Fear we never will again. My home this place was long ago, and home to the first Jedi as well." Dooku then takes a moment to look up and all around him as he says, with a wistful look upon his face, "It's my home as well, Master, and I promise you, this will be the home of many future generations of Jedi." With those words, Yoda's face takes on a peaceful look, and as he shuts his eyes, he says, "Many secrets this place still has. Keep them that way, you must." Dooku nods and says he understands, just as Master Yoda takes his last breath and disappears. That's when we switch scenes and are taken to the caves below the island, where we see Caleb Dume wandering around, using his saber as a light source and looking as if he's being called by something. Finally, he comes to a narrow crack in the cave wall, one likely caused by the battle that occurred above and shook the entire island. And he deactivates his saber, returns it to his belt, and manages to squeeze his way through and into a small room that has a huge crack in the floor, where we can see a bluish-green light shining up from below. Carefully then, and looking to be in amazement, Caleb starts to look around the room and takes note of strange runes carved on the wall. That's when he notices a small old wooden box on the floor that appears to have been placed upon a pedestal that has fallen over, again most likely during the recent ground shaking. And just as Caleb picks up the box, the rocky ground beneath him gives out, and Caleb plunges down into the bluish-green glow below him. Which is when we switch scenes, and again find ourselves on the strange world separated by light and dark, where we see Revan striding towards Bastila, who looks to be trying to get to her feet after having been hit by the particularly powerful force push from Revan. And with each step Revan takes towards her and into the light or living side of the world, everything around Revan dies and becomes dark. Now standing over her, Revan gives her a rather pitiful shake of the head and says, "You never had a chance against the power of the dark side. None of us did." Revan then extends a hand to her and says, "But I will give you one chance, my love, to join me, to embrace the dark side. And after you give yourself to it, together we will find a way to bring you back to life, so that at each other's side we can rule the galaxy for all of time as masters of life and death, as masters of the Force itself." For a very long moment, Bastila looks at the hand being extended to her and finally says, "And what of our son? What of Anakin?" Instantly, Revan pulls his hand back and clenches it into a fist. "That abomination is not our son." Bastila then pushes herself to her feet and says, "He is what our son was supposed to be, the light that will forever eliminate the darkness from the galaxy." Revan then shakes his head and snorts, "The dark side is as eternal as the Force itself. No one can destroy it forever. It will always rise again. To continue the fight against it is pointless." Just then, a large shadow is cast over them, and they both look up and see a large winged creature fly overhead, and towards where Qui-Gon is still fighting the horde of Sith race with the glowing white dagger. Revan then says, "And soon you shall see how pointless it is to try and fight the dark side." As the winged creature lands not far from Qui-Gon, it transforms into a pale-skinned humanoid with red eyes and red facial markings, and before Qui-Gon can even hope to respond, the figure raises a hand and shoots red force lightning from it and strikes Qui-Gon, and moments later, the Sith horde rushes forward and overwhelms him. Revan then says, "You see, my love, there is no hope against the dark side. Your champion has failed, and you lack both the will and strength to destroy me." But that's when we hear another voice from behind Revan, the voice of Master Yoda. "No such lack of will or strength do I have, Revan." Quickly, Revan whirls around, and to Yoda he says, I remember you, Master Yoda. You were the one I experimented on all those years ago, the one I learned much about the Force from." Yoda gives a slight nod and then says, "Much to learn you still have, Revan, about the Force, and show you just how much I shall." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. And now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. Also, because I'm sure many of you are curious, there are probably 2 parts left, though next week may turn into one long episode that concludes the story. I'm not 100% sure yet. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching.